Va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. And you shall craft for me a dwelling place, and I will dwell among you. The rabbis emphasize it doesn't say that God will dwell in the sanctuary. It says that God will dwell among the people for their collective efforts. This is a moment of harvesting for me, a moment in which I already begin to feel my goosebumps pop as I begin to harvest. Harvest what is my 34th High Holidays, my final Rosh Hashanah address to you, my community. A man comes to a rabbi and he says, Rabbi, if God is the same everywhere, why do I need to go to synagogue? And the rabbi says, it's true that wherever God is the same, but it's not true for you. Where you go can make a difference. When we gather in synagogue, we are called to feel something different. We're called to feel that this is indeed a mishkan, a sacred dwelling place. That we, by seeing each other, and now I pause to look around. I have a better vantage point than you do. To look around and know that last year there was nobody in this room. This year we're masked, and yet we're here. To be here in this moment is a privilege. To be here in this moment is a pause between the year that we've just been through, that collectively we have shared uncertainty, illness, and that as we look forward, we see before us uncertainty and hopefully much, much less illness. But this moment between here and there is a moment of harvest, a moment to acknowledge that out on the 5 freeway, the cars are flowing as another day. But for us who are choosing to be here, whether through the aid of your screen or in this room, we are engaged in a countercultural moment. To be here today on Rosh Hashanah is to link ourselves to belonging. Often for many it means to miss work or to miss school. It is a commitment to link ourselves to the Jewish people. On this day, feeling the privilege of addressing my community for the last time as the Rabbi of Congregation B'nai Israel, I seek to celebrate and to harvest 3 important privileges in my life. That of being a parent, of having served as a rabbi, and in being a Jew. Our Torah and Haftorah focus on birth. Abraham and Sarah have longed for a child. And finally, on this day, we read of the birth of Yitzchak. His name is that of laughter, a quality of celebration, a quality of surprise that after the longing, Abraham at the age of 100, 90 for Sarah, they are parents. Our Haftorah likewise is about the yearning for children. Hannah, as Rabbi Goldstein said, enters into the temple of Shiloh with grief because she, unlike the other wife of Elkanah, Peninnah, Hannah, has been barren. To have a child, we are reminded on Rosh Hashanah, is a gift. There are many who long to have children. The statistics in Jewish families are about 1 out of 5. in part because we are a community that marries later, that often puts off having children. The fertility rate of the American Jewish community is lower. The infertility rate is higher. For anybody, to have a child is a moment of surprise. No matter what you anticipate, when you are given that child, there's a sense of wow. That wow equals holy moment. Because no matter how much you might have learned in sex education class in grade school about how the various ingredients come together, when you're holding a child that is a morph of you and your mate, of Linda and me, when you hold a child, there is the sense of, wow, this child is ours, this child is healthy, and wow, who knows what it will mean as a trajectory. There is no greater responsibility we are given in life than that of nurturing a child. No greater privilege. The surprise in having become a parent is that it was far more work than I would have anticipated, particularly when the children were younger, and far more joy. And that joy continues to grow. In Yiddish, the word is nachas. It's a really sweet word. It's from the Hebrew, nachat ruach, satisfaction of the soul. I am privileged with Linda to have Joey and Jonathan with us in person, marking the significance of this moment in our family life, and our daughter Anna Rose, who will be with us on Yom Kippur watching on the screen. Linda and I are privileged to have 3 children that love each other. We are privileged to have had this responsibility that is ongoing, to nurture and to be nurtured by. That's a key word. What is it that nurtures us is to be embraced as holy gift. Our children nurture us. It doesn't, again, mean that it's always easygoing. There are different phases of parenting. And the challenge in parenting is with all that intense love and investment in your child to learn to let go. A comment on the word about love for one's child. Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach once said to one of the people after a concert, he said to him, "You are the highest of the high, the holiest of the holy." And somebody overheard and said, "Wait, you said that about me, that I was the highest of the high and the holiest of the holy. We can't both be the highest." And Reb Shlomo said, when a parent puts a child to sleep at night and looks at that child, you say, "You are the most beautiful baby in the world. I love you more than anything." That's not a comparative statement. That's an expression of love. That in that moment of focus, your child becomes your all. I and Linda are privileged to have 3 children that fill us. I am privileged to have had parents who loved me dearly. It was never a question how much my parents loved me and believed in me, which allows me to stand here in the presence of my sister Helene, with my niece Julia, my nephew Ben, to know how that goes across generations. To be nurtured by parents is so deeply, deeply important. What we parents have to give our children is affirmation, to let them know they are loved and beloved and worthy of love, not just by parents, but by who they are, by their very being. We see in our larger society that families without parents aren't to be called families. Those children all too often are broken, all too often leading to a sense of their own lack of value and even violence. And so, parenting is the greatest of privileges, responsibilities, and joys. But to be a parent, a source of affirming a child, is at the same time to be a parent. There are boundaries. In raising our children, Linda and I did not talk about certain private topics with our children. It would have been inappropriate to talk to them about our disagreements. It would have been inappropriate to talk to our children about physical intimacy. Our children are not our peers, and they are. That's the paradox of parenting, particularly as your children become adults. It means letting go and trusting them to make decisions, to only give advice when asked, precisely because we are authority figures. You don't use that authority unless asked. You love them and trust them. But that, for somebody on the outside, might look like a limitation, which leads me to being a rabbi. It is a great privilege to be a rabbi. To be a rabbi is the opportunity to nurture a community. It's a funny thing for me. I notice it. I mean, it took a number of years, but I noticed it. And that is, I remember the name of my congregants. When I'm in another synagogue and I'm introduced to people, the names don't stick. They stick for me in this community because each of you is my community. Each of you is my extended family. You matter. And dispositionally, not unlike with family, there's a quality of compassion and acceptance of people's foibles, shortcomings, that is different than in the larger world. To be a rabbi, and now I'm pulling back the curtain a little bit on what it means to be a rabbi, is to be a symbolic exemplar. That's the word coined by Rabbi Dr. Jacob Bloom. He says a rabbi is not much different than the Torah in the Ark. On one level, the rabbi is a symbol of the community, and even in some cases, a representative of God. An exemplar, one who is charged to live up to being an example of what the Torah teaches, of what God would want. That's a tall order. And it can weigh heavy if one wears it actively. But what draws one to become a rabbi is the sense of making a difference for a community, of serving God, of bringing people together with care, and the power which equals the ability to affect change in people's lives is precisely to be, in part, a symbol. When I go into a hospital, that's a moment of intimacy. People don't look their best. They don't feel their best. They don't want people to come and be with them. But when I go not just as Elie, I go as Rabbi Spitz. And when I come into a room of somebody who's sick, let alone somebody who's dying, with family gathered around, there's a sense of the rabbi cares, the community cares. We belong to something much bigger than us. That's my ticket to the most private moments in people's lives. When I sit with a family after a death and there are multiple generations, what an eye-opener that is. To be able to hear about a life from many different points of view, unfiltered, often with the tensions, with the disappointments. That's the privilege of being a rabbi. The challenge of being a rabbi is that a rabbi can be put up on a pedestal. It can be hard for the children of rabbis. I once lost my temper in a school setting when a teacher said of my daughter, well, she was talking during prayer, so I gave her a C- because she's the rabbi's daughter. I banged on the table and I said, how dare you treat my daughter any differently than any other child in your class? She cried. The teacher cried. My daughter was not so sure of my behavior. Which is to say, whether one is a rabbi's spouse, one is often held up to a higher standard. For me, as a rabbi, that's largely a plus, largely to live up to those expectations of Torah has allowed me to seek to be my best, to have the access to people in hard moments that are real, unfiltered, is to have the experience of the holy and to grow. The joy of being a rabbi is the opportunity to grow. Rabbis are referred to as cantors, as clay kodesh, holy vessels. That word holy, that's the word we use for kiddush. That's the word we use to celebrate Shabbat. It's the first thing called holy in the Bible, a day. And what is the nature of being holy? It's three things. It's to be set apart. The seventh day is set apart from the other six as a day to experience God and the beauty of creation and community. It's to be, as a result, physically feeling whole, a day to have celebratory meals, physical intimacy with one's spouse, to feel that you can take a nap. But more than physically whole, it's to feel the whole of belonging to community. And last, holy is not only whole, it's elevated. And so, Clay Kodesh has this enormous opportunity to be a vessel for the experience of others, to experience elevation, holiness. You can only do that if you're a vessel, namely, not thinking too much about yourself. When I was in rabbinical school, a rabbi in practical rabbinic said, rabbis-to-be, when you place your hands on a congregant to give them a blessing, you should feel 2,000 years of history oozing through your fingers. And I went, ooh. And I learned that you can't think about 2,000 years going through your fingers. You have to be a vessel. You have to be emptied of yourself. You have to be, if you can, as fully present, intuitively present, in order to evoke in others the presence of God. Which leads me to the privilege of being a Jew. To be a parent, you are defined not by the title, you're defined by what you do. Likewise, ultimately, to be a rabbi, you are remembered by your interactions. In some cases by your sermons, but mostly by your presence in times of caregiving. To be a Jew is an identity that we choose, but it's ultimately defined by what we do. It's not a feeling just in our heart, though it should be felt in our heart. It's how we act and live lives as Jews that give content to the privilege of a legacy that we have chosen to make an essential part of our identities. We have many identities, positive identities, but in this moment, we pause to know that to be a Jew is countercultural and a gift and a calling, not unlike being clergy. The Bible says before the Ten Commandments, Tiyu li mamlechet kohanim. You shall be to me a nation of priests. V'goy kadosh, a holy people. That's a tall order. That's an order of calling. Calling to stand apart, kadosh, from other peoples. To be willing to say, we are this extended family. It doesn't mean we're not part of a bigger world, but we are not orphans in history. We are a collective with a memory that we cultivate by learning through study, through hearing Torah, through how we act in the world. The prophet Isaiah will say you need to be an or lagoyim, a light to the nations. Again, not different than the choice of becoming clergy. We are a nation of clergy, and that is complicated. Rashi, the great Bible commentator, will say that anti-Semitism has as its root the sense of Jews having set themselves apart as a conscience for others. I read just this week an article that says there were over 70,000 civilian casualties due to U.S. bombings in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last 20 years. Collateral damage. War has civilian collateral damage. War is ugly. I say that as a proud American. Just last week, when U.S. troops were trying to get out U.S. civilians and Afghanis who had worked with Americans at the airport in Kabul, you may recall that there was, after the suicide attack that took 13 service people's lives, the next day there was a car that was bombed that had, so the military says, explosives in it. What didn't get as widely reported is that there were 10 civilians who were also killed. We didn't think about it in moral terms. We thought about it as it is so awful, the situation that the troops are in, trying to do good. Israel is judged by a double standard. It is the Jew among the nations. It is only in the fighting, or more, I should say, amplified in the fighting in Gaza, where the buildings are put on a loop of falling down and the number of civilians reported as if Israel could have prevented any of those deaths. That's not to say that Israel shouldn't try, as it does, to live up to a standard of care greater than any nation. Not to be better than any other nation, but because that is our moral duty, to try and protect civilians. But what I do know is that Jews have historically been put up on a pedestal for good that has also led to a double standard because you want to knock down who seems to be above you. I had the privilege to be on a telephone call with President Biden and 1,000 rabbis this past week. And President Biden, what was remarkable about this conversation, which lasted for over an hour, is that it was fully unscripted. And as he spoke to the rabbis, he said, I'll tell you where I first met Jews. It was in the work of civil rights. That's where I first met Jews in my life, because the Jewish people, he said, have always been the backbone of taking justice seriously. On one hand, it was deeply moving because what came through in that conversation was his sincerity. It is true that the Spingarns have family members who were creators of the NAACP. It is true that Abraham Joshua Heschel walked with Martin Luther King in Selma, even though that wasn't the way it was portrayed in the movie. We Jews have reason to be proud of our achievements for social justice. We have reason to be proud of the state of Israel and its achievements. It is never perfect. It will fall short. I worry about the future of the American Jewish community. I talk to my sons about it because they are of a younger generation. I see too many Jews not prioritizing, not celebrating, not being proud of the heritage, marked not by whether they say they're proud, but whether they do and act and make sacrifices and commitments that are countercultural. I do believe that we as an ancient people have survived because we are a people that sees ourselves with a purpose. It is not the past for which people will make sacrifices. It's not even for the present. People will make sacrifices because they feel that there is a purpose of how the future will look by how they live. We, as a Jewish people, when we hear the sound of the shofar, are called to be better. Whether as a father, as a rabbi, or as a Jew, it is not a status. It is an unfolding process of opportunity. Those roles that we have each have some limitations and great rewards. And so on this, my final Rosh Hashanah sermon, I celebrate with you. You who are here, you who are sharing in your own homes Jewish belonging, let us know what a privilege it is to be part of this extended community, a community that has guidelines provided by our Torah, by our sages, that give our children an identity of love, that give our children guidance of values, that give us a sense that life is good and worthwhile. Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, I am fulfilled. So many are my privileges that I did not have control over. I did not have control over my parents who so blessed me, of the siblings that I grew up with. But I did make choices. I chose my wife, Linda, and together we were blessed with children. That too was a choice that we didn't have full control over, and that has informed and given content and joy to our lives. I chose to become a rabbi. That too was a choice that informs my growth, and it's not over, for I will continue to grow, and I will continue to be in relationship with this community. And last, I was born a Jew, and yet it is a choice for each of us. Whether one is born a Jew or not, it is a choice to see in Jewish belonging a call, the call to be elevated at the price of at times being countercultural, to feel close to God, to see the world through the eyes of a creator who cares, who's the parent. God, I imagine your joy in this moment in seeing us, your children, gathered in synagogue with words that echo across generations of your children. May we grow toward you in light and love and service. Amen.